I'm going to call the ad hoc capital debt committee to order at 6:30, May 2nd, 2024 in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Madam President. Lisa Photo,
Present.
Matt Sullivan,
Present.
Tim Cummings.
He's here.
Alderman GOV.
Yeah, present.
Alderman Clea is here. Alderman Clemens.
Here.
Alderman O'Brien. Alderman Wilshire.
Here.
And Mayor Donches. I'm sorry, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6 present.
Thank you very much. Discussion, we're going to start tonight.
7 present, sorry.
Okay.
I can't add.
General discussion with the Administrative Services Director, Tim Cummings. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes,
Director
thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Again, for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. Just to set the table a little bit this evening and a quick recap as to where we're at. As you recall, we started this ad hoc initiative about 6 or so weeks ago, where we're looking at trying to develop an understanding of how to manage our debt service over the next coming years, with the idea of trying to maintain a stable tax rate. And so the CFO has made some recommendations on how to be able to do that. And one of the items that seemed to resonate or behoove us is to try to pull a group together to talk about various projects and approximate order of magnitude of cost over the next 5 or so years, to give us a little bit of an orientation. All of this is non-binding, but nonetheless will help us develop a plan, if you will, with some policy guidance behind it to help staff and others over the coming years, so we maintain that stable tax rate. And so with that recap and orientation, Madam President, this evening we're going to continue the conversation. As you know, we've already had police and fire in. We are now having a conversation this evening with administrative services, community development, economic development. I believe on the 7th, we will hear from schools, public health, and library. And we will continue this on with the goal of trying to wrap this up sometime in mid to late May, with hopefully a conversation about how we want to proceed. So the goal this evening is to talk a little bit about the projects that we put on the list that you all received. If you recall, back in January or so, the city administration met with all the various department heads and various major departments here in the city. We got an understanding of the priorities, and then based off of the prioritized list, we are asking the various departments to speak about how they would envision spending capital monies over a 5-year horizon to help inform the conversation. And so, as I mentioned, we already heard from police and fire. I'm going to kick it off now and talk to you a little bit about admin services. And I'm going to leave my priorities really focused on one project, and that is for a $1 million request for HVAC. And I will note that on the priorities list, you'll note there's an additional $2 million. That's for general city hall renovations. That would be for ADA compliance, bathroom renovations, rear door and parking lot area upgrade, and then the elevator. But those are not necessarily as timely. Those could, if need be, put off. The one project, if you will, that cannot be put off, we need to do. There's a strong possibility that we may not have working heat in this building next winter. Is the fact that we have an HVAC project. And so we've been working with Denron Hall. They gave us a quote back in 2023 for about $600,000. And there's some exclusions to that. So we feel comfortable pegging the project at about $1 million if we were to do it sometime in the next 12 or so months. So,
Director Cummings, 1 second. I wanted to invite President Bishop to come up and sit. Do you
Oh,
don't?
it's okay. I just wanted to get information. I
Okay,
don't need to be at the table for this one. Thank you.
okay. You're welcome.
So if I may, Madam President, just to close out my comments, so really, the idea is to try to over the next year or so, or the next 5 years, spend some monies on some city buildings, particularly the City Hall here, where we have a lot of deferred capital maintenance, and the priority project for us would obviously be the HVAC systems here in the building. So that's the only slide I have, so I'll close my comments here. Happy to take any questions. Then otherwise, Madam President, we have economic development and community development next.
Are they going to be as succinct and as quick as you?
I'm hoping.
Is there another are the other TVs working or no? Just this one?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Something is definitely going on.
Okay.
I'll sit down
Would you
here.
pull up the
Yeah, I'm gonna do
the
that.
garages one?
That's not it, right?
No.
No.
That
there
one.
you go.
There we go.
Director Hannum, if you prefer to sit, that's okay too.
Okay. I prefer to sit.
Okay. Alderman Dowd.
One question to Director Cummings. When you said elevator, is that both elevators or just the infamous one?
That would be, if I may, Madam President.
Director Cummings.
Yes,
And-
Alderman Dowd, that is just for one elevator, and that would be for
Sit over here.
here in the rear of the building, the quote-unquote infamous elevator. I sometimes affectionately refer to it as the Clee elevator.
I've been stuck in it one too many times.
There's the problem.
I know. I used to call it the Brian
Melissa McCarthy elevator.
McCarthy elevator, yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's Ghost Remains.
Director Hannum?
So Liz Hannum, Director of Economic Development. I'm going to start with the public parking garages. We're looking at a $15 million ask for both garages. We'll start with Elm Street Garage. I won't read off all the issues, but we are seeing lots of kind of crumbling with the concrete and some issues with water intrusion into the building. So there's lots of work that needs to get done there. And then, we did conditions assessment in 2022, I believe. And these were the recommendations based on that for high, medium, and lower priority issues. So we're looking to do most of, or all of the high priority, most of the moderate, and some of the lower priority issues. And then the High Street Garage has very similar issues. The only thing that's different is there aren't as many windows. So it is about a 10% reduction in cost for that project over the Elm Street Garage. And we have the same list, almost the exact same list for High Street Garage as we did for Elm Street Garage. I will just kind of editorialize that we do see some actual crumbling, and we have have some kind of makeshift measures. Luckily, not in any public areas, but we are gonna see some of those issues come up in the next 5 years. So this is a high priority project. And then I'll just say that the steps we've taken to date, we have done the conditions assessment. We've done the design for the repair work is 100% complete. We hired an owner's project manager to manage the construction project. We've just received some of the bid forms that need to get converted, but then we can get those bid documents ready to go. So essentially, we are very close to being able to go out to bid on this project. And we need these garages to work with our the recommendations for our parking study. And so otherwise we would lose about 1,000 spaces to our downtown. When I think we have 3,300 or so spaces in downtown. So this is a good chunk of the public spaces that are available. So I think that's it for that project. Quick enough. I have 3 other projects on the list that are not as high a priority. Those are wants rather than needs. I think the one project that I'll point out is our placemaking project. We are working with a marketing firm right now to create a campaign, and in order to do some of the things that help us build that brand, I would love to see some physical improvements and investments in not just the downtown, but other places around the community. So we could probably slot those projects in, either kind of phase them out, or we could bond the whole thing and do a larger project. But so that there's some play there, I think. So that's all of my projects.
Alderman Dowd?
Yeah, a question, on the garage work, if the money was authorized by, say, the 1st of July, how long would it be before you could actually start work?
Well, we would have to go out to bid, so probably 3-ish months, which would put us in October. So probably not the ideal time frame to be pouring concrete, but as soon as construction could be reasonably started.
So, Director Cummings, are we looking at FY '25 or FY '26?
For selling of the bond?
For selling bonds?
I think it would probably be more FY '26 of selling the bonds.
Okay.
Alderman Govea?
Thank you, Madam President. On the parking garage thing, I've been a pretty big advocate for fixing these up, so I would like to see it pretty high up on our list. I think that FY '26 kind of answers a lot of questions. I think that should definitely, when we start kind of formulating where we want these, could be a really good slot. I think that should be something we really look at. It's a moneymaker for the city, makes the city downtown look better. I think it should, out of a lot of stuff on this list, is probably one of the more important projects in my eyes.
If I may, Madam President, I just want to
Director Cummings.
clarify. So there's a nuanced distinction, and I think I'm taking the words out of Alderman Dowd's mouth. So authorizing is one action, selling the bond is another action. So we could authorize for FY '25, but really it's selling it would be in FY '26. So I don't want to get caught up in those details per se. I hear exactly what you're saying, but there is that nuanced distinction.
Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. I know that the parking study has given us thoughts about how what the rates would be for those garages. Did that study take into account the a $15 million bond and what it would cost to offset some of those costs, or is that not part of the calculation?
Unfortunately, it is not. So there is a formula that includes debt service, but it would assume further debt service and not this existing one. So this was assumed to be a kind of deferred maintenance project rather than a parking study project.
Okay.
So we're essentially putting money in the bank for future bonds, future maintenance.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, I understand. A follow-up?
Sure.
So, my only other question is, and you may not know the answer to this, and that's fine, but how would we balance the usage of these? Would we do is the construction going to, completely close one garage while it's being worked on? And, or how is that gonna affect people who use these every day?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with absolutely not.
Okay.
So we are going to phase, so we don't have an exact plan yet, but we are assuming that we'll work on one side and keep one side open, and a travel lane. We'll maybe work on one deck, and keep the second deck open, things like that. So we are gonna phase it. So we don't have a plan if we close an entire garage at one time. So the plan is, if it takes a little bit longer, then that's what we have to do.
Okay.
To keep it partially open.
And would the work be being done simultaneously on both garages?
Likely.
Okay. Okay.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Madam President. On that spreadsheet that we originally got, there were two other items, unless I missed it. The bidder project and the wayfinding. Have those kind of gone by the wayside, or?
No, so those are still on the list. Those are just potential projects that we don't really have a specific thing for yet. The BIDA project may or may not end up needing that funding. But I think you're going to hear from Director Sullivan where a potential project that could kind of incorporate some of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Dowd?
Yes, it's for Director Cummings. Are we just assuming that all costs associated with turning Elm Street into flat land are all going to be absorbed by whoever's bidding the new development? Or is there any city cost that we envision, and when would that be?
You're talking about the Elm Street garage?
No.
Elm Street School.
The Elm Street Middle School? Are we anticipating any costs for the Elm Street Middle School? Is that, I guess I just want to make sure I am understanding.
Are we
the question.
anticipating any city costs, or are you anticipating that whoever bids this development of these 9 acres, or 8.5 acres, is going to cover the cost of tearing down the building?
So we have on the list that was presented back in January approximately $30 million for the Elm Street Middle School / Keefe renovation project. In there, you could have some demolition costs carried. If you're asking specifically, demolition costs to tear down the building is not something at this time that the city has anticipated. We would expect any developer to take on that cost.
Because I was just looking to see if there was any bond money that was going to be envisioned, and if it isn't, then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that at this time. We have not done any environmental testing to tell us what's hot. I can't tell you, so I would rather shift that over to a future developer of the what I would say is approximately 7 acres, because I think we're going to be, holding back per the instruction of the Board of Aldermen approximately 2 acres of the Keefe Auditorium.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Matt, where's yours?
It should be already open, actually.
You can delete it.
Yours is a PowerPoint too?
It is.
Is this one?
You'll see quickly that I missed the assignment on brevity, so I'll try to
Is
rip
this one,
through
is
this.
this one yours?
It is. It is.
Okay.
How many slides?
I'd rather
I
not
just
comment.
hid that from everybody, so yeah.
26.
And
This is not the Matt Sullivan.
it is
You
not.
do have the floor,
You
though.
got it blushing now, yes.
Thank you, Madam President. If I
You're
may,
welcome.
whenever Ms. Chisholm is, oh, she's ready. Okay.
She's hiding.
Could I ask her to come up and join me? Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to, thank you, for the opportunity to discuss our projects this evening. You'll see that we included 5 total projects within the overall debt list or capital list. And these represent certainly projects of varying priority, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight, hopefully briefly. But I've also included here one additional project, which was listed on the right side of that sheet, which is actually the Main Street Reconstruction Project. And I'll talk about the design component to that as well. But I wanted to just provide this brief overview, and certainly you can see here that the total number is a little shocking if you begin to add it up in your mind, but this is generally what we're looking for as part of this plan. I will just note that in my presentation, I did include years when we anticipate that these projects would happen. That could change based on availability of funds and certainly the recommendations, obviously, of this committee and certainly the Board of Aldermen and Mayor. So jumping into our first project, and this is our, without question, community development's highest priority project. And that is because this is a regulatory requirement as part of the 2 hydroelectric facilities that I think many of you are familiar with here in the city of Nashua, those being the 3 megawatt Mine Falls turbine facility and 1 megawatt Jackson Mill facility. But these are 2 regulatory compliance measures that we have to implement over the coming years. And with that, I know my boundaries, and so I'd like to pass it to the expert, Ms. Deb Chisholm, the city's sustainability manager, to talk a little bit about what these entail and what we'll need to mobilize for capital. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb Chisholm, Sustainability Manager, Waterways Manager, not expert on hydroelectric. But as Matt said, we have 2 hydroelectric facilities, and one of the most important parts of those facilities is the fish passage. At this point, we are close to the end of the relicensing of the Mine Falls facility, which will give us, although it's not known yet, it will give us at least a 30-year license to operate that facility. With the Jackson Mills facility, if you've seen it lately, it's in a bit of disrepair. We are right in the middle of replacing all of the equipment at that facility, and the result of that basically required us to institute some additional upgrades to our fish passage. Anytime there is anything that has to do with licensing or the exemption to licensing that we actually have for Jackson, the requirements for that go right to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, New Hampshire Fish and Game. They all get their say as part of that whole process. And so really what we've been doing over the last 5 years really for Mine Falls is trying to negotiate with the what we call as a collective group the fish agencies to figure out exactly what their requirements are and to try to negotiate with them to find a middle ground, if you will, on what the requirements are and what the costs are associated with those upgrades. So what we've got in front of you is a $7.5 million cost, and that would be costs that would be incurred for both facilities. And if you could go to the, there we go, next slide. You can see on there the breakdown of where the monies would be spent as far as which facility needs what. Most of it is relatively expensive as far as the replacement of the downstream fish passage at Jackson, just about $2 million for that. And the other cost would be the downstream fish passage at Mine Falls. So when you look at that last column as far as the completion dates are concerned, we're talking about 2030, 2031 for both of those facilities. But I will tell you that dealing with federal and state agencies relative to coming to some conclusions on exactly what the specifics are for both of those fish passage projects, we pretty much need to be starting immediately in order to get done in a timely manner. The dates that are up there essentially have been given to us by the facility, by the fish agencies, and basically they've told us, here's what we want and here's when you need to have it done by. So we will, the Mine Falls one is a little bit flexible as we're not quite through the relicensing process at this point. The dates for the Jackson Mills facility are a bit flexible because here we were thinking we would have been 2 years into a new turbine at this point, but we are not at that point. So there is a little bit of flexibility there too, but the idea is to start as soon as possible.
I would just add that we fully anticipate and are prepared for when this bond comes forward, the bond request comes forward to the full board, for there to be a conversation about the relationship between expenses at these facilities and revenues. I will say that when these facilities were purchased, Certainly, revenue was a component that was considered, but it wasn't the only thing, obviously. These are clean energy generating locations, and so that plays a role in both our sustainability plan that was recently adopted, and certainly in our general community objectives to generate as much alternative energy as possible. And so it's a balance of those two priorities that we'll ultimately be talking about, but we are very sensitive to the idea that revenues do play a role here, and we'd like to offset the expenses to the maximum extent practicable with the revenues that we collect.
Alderman Dowd.
So, if I heard you right, this project is going to be over several years, 2030, 2031. Do we have a layout of the cost associated by year based on the work that's going to be done? And I say that for two reasons. One, to meet the compliance issues of the federal government, if we pass the bond that covers this, that doesn't mean we're incurring any debt service right away. And the other thing is, are we anticipating that the debt service for this work is going to be covered by the revenues? And if so, then it probably is neutral relative to the 30 million we're talking about.
If I may, Madam President,
Director Cummings.
before Director Sullivan answers that question, I just want to add on to what Alderman Dowd asked, and by asking to distinguish, the 7.5, if I'm understanding, is isolated solely to the, what I would call the fishing upgrade improvements, but are there other expenditures beyond that, capital in nature, that should also be anticipated, so you're actually doing an apples to apples of all expenses?
I'm happy to take a crack at that, and Ms. Chisholm can fill in. So I want to remind folks that we have several other funding sources that are expense incurring lines for the turbines. One, we have an emergency trust fund that we've often funded via as part of the escrow process. Two, we have an operational budget for these facilities, out of which we pay our operator and for other expenses as they arise. And so they're more emergency than they are sort of long-term capital planning or deferred maintenance, to Director Cummings and Alderman Dowd's questions. But there certainly are other funding sources that are going into these facilities. And so, to Alderman Dowd's question, when I talk about us looking at and reviewing revenues, we're looking at all of the combined expenses across all of those different operational lines and existing debt service and bonds that are outstanding. We're taking the entire package into consideration, including our operational expenses that we pay to Essex Hydropower. And so there are other expenses, is the short answer. Now, to Alderman Dowd's question, the objective certainly is to cover all of the debt service across all of the bonds that are outstanding with revenue. What I will tell you, though, and Ms. Chisholm and others know far better than I, it's very, very hard to do that with a hydroelectric facility because the revenues are so volatile year to year. In some years, we've made as much as $2.1 million in revenue. In very early years, we were making $300,000 in revenue. Now, there are different factors there. We're pretty comfortable that we're going to be making above and beyond $1.5 million in revenue moving forward, but we can't guarantee that. And so what we'll ultimately be presenting to you is a plan that we believe will cover the expenses, but there will be risks involved with that. And I just want to be really clear about that there's no way to guarantee that the revenues will cover the expenses, but we're trying to present a plan that does that to the extent we can.
Hello? So, and I realize that if we have a very dry summer, it's not an issue, having problems, but we have some flexibility in the way that we pay debt service on the bonds. So that can, the good years we can pay more, other years we pay less. That's something that gets worked out by the city treasurer. But the point I was getting at, if this committee is looking at the $30 million a year, if it's being paid by something other than the city's budget, which I have some familiarity with, then it's not, it wouldn't be included as a hit against the 30 million. That's, I just want to.
Yep, and Alderman Dow, I'm realizing I didn't really answer your question, your first question, and that was, we're obviously not going to begin incurring all of these expenses immediately, But I believe our recommendation from a sort of a budgeting perspective and a predictability perspective would be to bond the full amount initially and lay out stable interest and principal payments over the life of the bond, rather than, and we've contemplated coming in for multiple bonds to sort of lay out the debt service in various years, but we would recommend bonding the entire amount early so that as we begin to collect revenues, we're covering that for the full bond amount rather than doing it incrementally.
So can I address that? When you take out a bond, you take it out for the full liability of the bond, say $7.5 million in this instance.
Yep.
But we don't sell bonds until we need the money. And the initial payments for the costs associated with it get paid out of city cash. And then they sell the bonds to replenish that. So the timing involved
Yes.
keeps getting moved out. So is relative to the 30 million that we're talking about, we need to ensure that we know where the phasing is on all the projects we're talking about.
I couldn't agree more. Director Cummings and I were discussing this last night to some extent. So I know that's what this committee is charged with doing, but I fully agree.
And if we could circle back, I think, if I may, Madam President, the goal of the exercise here is to really tease out what the debt service would be and impact the taxpayer, which is the general fund. So other revenues that come in that may offset that quote-unquote $30 million, or enterprise fund monies, that shouldn't be counted towards this $30 million figure. We are really looking at just general fund debt service impact. And so when you have ways like parking and the garages that collect fees, or in this instance, hydroelectric facilities that we get reimbursed for through or paid revenue for, that shouldn't necessarily go towards the general fund $30 million figure that we're talking about right now.
Alderman, please.
Okay, I'm going to belabor this conversation a little bit. So I understand what you're saying is this money is going to be coming out of the general fund, and therefore we should look at it that way. But should we not, and based on it sounds like from the revenue, you're saying that it's not stable enough to count on it, but should we not, and I say this for parking as well, should we not be looking at potential avenues of payment rather than coming out of the general fund?
Could I take a crack just quickly at that? I think Director Cummings' point is that only some of the capital projects before you actually have revenue generating ability. And that revenue generating ability, unless it's in an enterprise fund, as Director Foto maintains, unless it's in an enterprise fund, it shouldn't be factored into the consideration of whether the project is a high priority or not. So as much as I'm making the case for my own project here that we're sort of revenue neutral, that shouldn't play a role, nor does it diminish the total bond request that you're actually going to be considering. This isn't $0 just because we're going to be earning $7.5 million of revenue. Does it help make the case? Well, I hope it does, but certainly it doesn't play a role in where it slots into the capital plan, or shouldn't.
Man. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking if we do have a way of paying this off, and in this particular case, where it sounds like our back is to the wall on this particular one, and our back may be to the wall for the parking garage too. I'm not quite sure on that, but it sounds like we don't have a choice. We're going to have to do this, otherwise we're going to, kind of be up the creek without a paddle, no pun intended. But so when I'm looking at this, if I know there's a potential revenue stream that can help pay this, I'm more likely to give it a priority. Still stay within the 30 million, I'm not saying that, but in my mind, I'm thinking of it as being more of a priority.
May I, Madam President?
Director Cummings.
I think when we get to that point in the conversation, what you're gonna see is some of these projects in a separate category.
Yeah.
Like you'll see it, if this was a sheet, this would be in just a different table, if you will. You'd have another table with maybe the non-revenue projects, and then the projects that are identified that generate revenue, but separately held. And we need to, from a legality standpoint, recognize that we're using general bond obligation funds So we need to account for it. But we also know somewhere else on our books, we're taking in that revenue. That is what Director Sullivan is saying actually offsets it and makes it neutral.
So as long as it comes to us, pardon me, I'm sorry.
That's right.
As long as it comes to us in the package that you just said, where these ones that are generating revenue, we can look at it that way. And it, you know, I'm not saying again that it was going to change the amount of the $30 million. I'm still saying we stick with that, but it makes it easier to know that this may not be quite the burden on the taxpayer when we're making our decision. And again, as an alderman, it makes me feel like I can justify this as this is not just a need, it's a must. And maybe that's not the case, but, and when I'm looking at the safety of the elevators, listen, I got an elevator on my brain. I keep picturing myself being caught in that again. The garages, if we lost 1,000 parking spaces, potentially that's a loss of revenue. So that's why I'm saying is, if you're going to give it to us separately like that, then I appreciate that. Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So, I guess I would ask: is there a way to put the hydroelectric dams in an enterprise fund?
No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
Alderman Clemmons, there absolutely is. For a variety of reasons, I think there's been some reluctance around that, for obvious reasons, right? I mean, because of the variability of the revenue and the recognized need to have funds available to cover capital costs, I think there's been a hesitance around that. I would suggest that it's a bit different than parking because of that climate-based volatility. That said, we sort of look at it as an enterprise fund when we're thinking about budgeting and even thinking about capital projects like this. We generally ambition to cover expenses with revenues, but if we were to move in that direction, of course, my ask would be, I wouldn't want that to shut off our ability to come back to the aldermen for general funds in the event that we needed them, but it certainly could be done.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, isn't the landfill in a one of those, and that we don't cover the costs of that either. But my point is that if we did this, we could move that $7.5 million out of the 30 million calculation, and then we would have $7.5 million to spend somewhere else. And I think that, to me, is more important than reducing what we're going to be spending to $23.5 million, factoring this in. That's my perspective, because even if we don't spend that $7.5 million, we don't know what we don't know. And so we can sit here and we can plan for $30 million over the next 5 years and spend all of it. And if something happens and we have to bond, then we're going to be in trouble. So I think there needs to be some flexibility. I'm seeing this as maybe a possibility to be able to utilize this as a way to reduce that amount without us being in a bad situation, I guess, for some unknown reason that comes up. Who knows what it could be, right? I mean, I remember when the roof of the Penachuk collapsed and had to fix that, and that cost, I think millions of dollars, and you just never know what's going to happen. So, but I did have another question. It's unrelated to the amount. What has changed? Because both of those dams have fish ladders right now. So what has changed in the anatomy of fish that have required us to spend $7.5 million to update the fish ladders that are already there?
That's an excellent question.
Deb
If you know the answer to that, I mean, please let us know.
Well, there is something to be said for the age of both units.
Yeah.
Both of those facilities were built in the 80s. And specifically speaking about the fish ladder at Jackson Mills, the majority of that fish ladder is made of wood. And it is in water 24/7. So we do improvements, we do repairs every year. Like this time of year, fish passage season for the herrings starts any day now. So Essex Hydro has been out at Jackson Mills facility replacing some of the plywood boards that are out there that are the baffles within that ladder. But we do get, every time the fish agencies come out and do an inspection, they tell us every year, I don't think we should be continuing in this manner. You guys need to figure out how to change this so that it's a more sustainable, longer-lasting facility. The elevator at Mine Falls is in a little bit better shape. Again, installed back in the 80s, and to be honest with you, when we acquired that facility, that elevator didn't even work. So I'm grateful that we have Essex on board because they are very knowledgeable about how to jerry-rig that thing so that it works for us every year. But we are getting to the point where you just can't find the parts that you need because of the age of the equipment. So it's becoming a little bit more problematic, but we have very specific requirements on how often that thing has to run, and if we can't do it, then we're in trouble.
Alderman Clemmons.
So are these fish ladders that we're intending here going to be more robust in the sense that there'll be less maintenance, less, I mean, it's essentially a water passageway. So I would hope that, if we spend this kind of money, that it would last longer than 45, 50 years. I would hope that it would last 100 years, so I don't know, what is the time frame of spending $7.5 million for fish?
Question. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to say in the sense that it's possible that regulatory requirements could change that would trigger additional expenses or modifications to the system in the future. I mean, I think we look at these as generational improvements. I don't think it's 100 years, Alderman Clemmons, to be honest with you. I just don't know that any material is going to necessarily last for that long based on the conditions that it's in. But I mean, I think we're looking at these as 40 to 50 year projects. But I can't say that they'll last beyond that and we won't be back in 50 years when we're all gone asking for more money. I just don't want to make that commitment, I guess. But they are generational improvements. We're not going to be back in 10 years. They're intended to last for decades.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Alderman Dow.
Just a couple things. We're not the only city involved with this. Manchester's also building a new fish ladder, and it's all federal driven, isn't it, for licensing. But if this is going to last 40, 50 years, then we don't necessarily do a 15 or 20-year bond. We could do a 25 or 30-year bond, which means the debt service is less.
You
So
certainly could.
it's easier to pay out of the revenue than if it was a 20 or 15-year bond. Next.
All set?
I want to note for the record that we were brief there, tried to be. I will move quickly through the next 5 projects. I do think, I will say prepare everyone, they're kind of interesting. So if you have questions, certainly happy to take them as I go here. But the next is, The next is Main Street reconstruction. The project that's included within the plan at $30 million requires a bit of explanation. Obviously, I don't need to belabor this point. We've been in front of various committees and in front of the board for several years, since the Imagine Nashua plan, since the narrowing of Main Street, and most recently since the downtown circulation study, talking about modifications to the Main Street corridor. Those are generally intended to produce a complete streets-oriented design that would better accommodate pedestrians, bicycles, certainly our transit buses, and still allow for passage of vehicles, of course, but really transform the downtown area into a much more vibrant and engaging space. And again, you've heard about this from myself, Director Cummings, Director Hannah many, many times, so I won't get into it too much. But what I did want to talk about is that we have submitted a sizable grant to USDOT as part of the RAISE program. We had submitted one last year and scored very competitively, but ultimately did not make sort of the last cut. That grant is intended to fund sort of 100% level construction design for plans to redesign Main Street. We're waiting patiently. We expect some time in July, I believe it is, to hear back from USDOT. But I flagged this particularly because this is one of certainly the mayor's top priorities. As staff, we feel very passionately about this project, but we recognize that there's significant debt need across the community. And so we're really trying to pursue this. While we're pursuing it aggressively, we're trying to pursue it with as much grant funding as possible, and trying to find alternative means of funding. That's not to say that there won't be some ask by staff or the mayor for general funds or some other local funding source, but I want to be very, very clear that we're trying to get this project off the ground or to a serious stage using primarily grant funds, and we would have been remiss to not include it on this project. In the event that we were to secure the $3.5 million and go through 100% design over the next, let's say, 12 or so months, we would then be directly positioned to apply for construction dollars through the RAISE program. They very much promote sort of going from a design grant to a construction grant. And so the process could move very quickly. And so we wanted to include it here in the interest of just re-emphasizing that this project is a priority, that we're continuing to work on it as a city team, and making you aware of the fact that we are working on grant applications to move this forward actively. And we certainly appreciate the support that we've gotten from the boards. We wanted to include it here. And I'll move directly to the next one. I'm happy to take questions as we go, but the coming projects are relatively similar in some ways. And I did just include some slides on the downtown circulation study that contemplated the Main Street narrowing, and of course the step work that was done by Director Photo and Engineer Hudson. There were some concept designs for alternative configurations of Main Street. The next project is, again, a bit of a longer-term effort, meaning that we've been working on this for about 30 years. I'm sort of joking, but in all seriousness, this project's been on the table for many, many years.
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
We've made we've taken a substantial step, though, I think, at the local level, and that being that the Board of Aldermen actually mobilized local funds for the first time that I'm aware, in the amount of approximately $75,000 to fund work that's ongoing. And that work specifically involves the city engaging with New Hampshire DOT, Mass DOT, the MBTA, and CSX, the rail line owners, trying to talk to them about a modified project, which is what we're referring to as the IOS, the initial operating segment, being a Nashua first option or extension of the commuter rail service from Lowell to Nashua. We have had engagement with NHDOT. We are working right now to make contact with Mass DOT and MBTA to talk about this project, and that's all really in the interest of getting a green light or red light from them as to whether this might be a viable project. I think we've referred to it as a go, no-go, which is what I've included on the slide here. And so over the next 2 months, fingers crossed, we anticipate having some sense from those partners, particularly in Massachusetts and certainly CSX, as to whether this is a project that they're willing to entertain, because we frankly need their participation to move this forward. And so pending that being a go, the next steps would be actually moving forward with several things, and that's what the $1.5 to $2 million represents. It's included within the plan. I've listed a few of those tasks here, that being updates to the key project metrics. This particularly involves ridership and other data that were produced as part of the DOT work several years ago. An update to the financial plan. All of this would reflect the initial operating segment only. Identification of funding sources. This is probably the trickiest part of this work because it involves a conversation about where the money would come from. Continued coordination with Federal Transit Authority, which is ultimately the major part of this project, and MBTA and NHDOT and Mass DOT. And then ultimately updates to the 30% design documents that were generated as part of the NHDOT project that would prepare us for an application to the Federal Transit Administration's New Starts or Capital Investment Grant SIG application process. It's possible that we'll have to advance some components of the design past 30%, sort of the critical pieces, But we believe that $1.5 to $2 million would get us to that point where we would have a competitive application to submit. But obviously, that would all depend on the ability to identify local funding sources, both for the capital build out and certainly the operational costs as well. And so a lot of, like Main Street, a lot of things could change here in the coming months. We could hear from Mass DOT that they simply don't want to move forward, and then we're in a very different place. And so expect more on this front. Director Hanneman, myself, and others at the city level are working really, really hard on this with our partners, and Director Cummings has done tremendous work to get us to this point, but more information to come on this, and so this could easily become a project that's way on the back burner depending upon what we hear. For folks that were at the Finance Committee last night, you're aware of this, and certainly those that have been at Board of Aldermen meetings where you've heard about the Mohawk Tannery or the Veterans Memorial Parkway redevelopment. This is a $3 million pedestrian bridge project that was initially contemplated as being part of the developer's obligations as part of this project, but has actually shifted to being a city obligation, and I want to be very, very clear about that. This is a $3 million proposal to bond a pedestrian bridge that would connect Mine Falls Park to Little Florida, certainly, and to the Mohawk Tannery redevelopment. This was identified as early as 1977 in the recreational plan that was created by the city, this connection in this particular location. We have a lot of walkers and other users that I think would be anxious to make this connection. And the Mohawk Tannery redevelopment is sort of the catalyst, I think, for looking at this again. The way that the master development agreement is currently laid out is that the developer would be responsible for actually going through the permitting of this bridge. That's important because bridges are complicated. They involve U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, they involve DES, they take a long, long time. As you probably heard as part of the Riverfront project and other efforts that the city has worked on, they will be responsible for that obligation prior to the first issuance of a certificate of occupancy as part of the Mohawk Tannery project, or December 31st of 2029, whichever is later. And so ultimately they'll be responsible for permitting this, and then substantial completion would have to be done on this prior to 50% of their certificates of occupancy or 12/31 of 2031. And so in some ways there is an obligation of the municipality to do this in a sense, but I want to be very clear that obviously it requires authorization of the Board of Aldermen to actually bond this. But we expect that there would be a request to bond this over the coming years as we get through the remediation process and construction begins in earnest on the project. I'll just say personally, I'm really excited about this connection. I think we have a wonderful, and Director Photo and the Mine Falls Advisory Committee have a wonderful facility in Mine Falls Park. I think more access to and use of the park is always a good thing as long as the character is preserved. So I think a direct connection here really, really makes sense. I also wanted to just note that we are in the process of engaging with BPW and Mine Falls Advisory Committee on an ongoing basis about this improvement. We recognize that there'll be a need to consult with them should this move forward in the future. And I believe Alderwoman Clee, you may have a question if Madam President would entertain it.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Director Sullivan. It's not so much a question as a comment to those that are listening who may have missed last night's meeting. One of the key things about this bridge that was also discussed by the developer was that there were some maintenance issues, minor maintenance issues that they would do. We would have all major in the future, so that I think taking, again, when this bubbles up to what we make decisions on, we need to also know that for future, not only are they doing this, the permitting and so on, which would be somewhat of a cost to the city, but it would also be that they're going to, I think they do some kind of like painting and things like that. Any true construction issues that happen with the bridge, the city would take care of it. So I think that also needs to be as part of this description for this.
So thank you. I neglected my last bullet point on the slide, which is that the developer will be responsible for long-term maintenance of the bridge. I apologize for the error that appears there. The city would be responsible for long-term, sort of larger capital repairs to the bridge or replacement of the bridge in the future, but they would be responsible for snow removal, those sorts of things on the bridge. I also just should note that the developer would be responsible for constructing this. We would be reimbursing them for construction costs, but this would not be something that the city would be managing on the construction side. So that lessens the burden on staff to actually be doing that piece of it. And certainly, I think saves costs from an economy of scale perspective as well. So I just want to point that out. But you're absolutely right that they would be responsible for that maintenance.
Thank you.
The next project, Director Hannum alluded to this a little bit earlier.
Actually, I'm sorry, Madam President.
I'm sorry.
I did have a question on the previous slide. So this 3 million, you're anticipating this to be included in the next 5-year plan, obviously, right? This is almost a required one though, right? Because at what point, I guess, do we have the ability to, if we wanted to walk away from this? Because if the developer is planning to do it, and we are committing to reimbursing them, then we might as well commit to it tonight, as far as I'm concerned. So at what point do we have to, would we have, as a city or as a group here, to renege on this and say, you know what, we don't want to build this?
Okay.
Go ahead, Director Sullivan.
I'll give my take on this. No, I think we'll be in alignment. I would recommend that you move on this as quickly as possible. That's actually why I put this as the only 2024 project on my list. I would say that the latest you could wait it would be the end of the remediation process. But my recommendation, I'd like Director Cummings to speak too. My recommendation would be that you don't wait, and that you do obligate this as soon as possible. It's contemplated as a general obligation bond, I believe, within the master development agreement.
Yeah.
Because of the arrangement, I believe this has to be authorized. So I'll leave my comments there.
If I may, Madam President, my anxiety went up with even Director Sullivan suggesting that we wait until the end of the remediation period. We are going to have a legal obligation, and to some degree, to be fair to the development team and the private sector, we should be willing to understand we need to authorize this money. Just as long as we can authorize the money in knowing that we don't necessarily need to have it up as part of our debt service and start the repayment until later on when necessary. But I was anticipating having this be a bond authorization request sometime in the next 3 to 6 months as part of the financing package that I mentioned last night. And ideally, it would be part of the closing package that gets all memorialized in one closing binder for one complete total project document center. That's how I've kind of memorialized it in my mind. So we really need to know sooner rather than later if this is still a priority for the community.
Alderman Flake.
Thank you, Madam President. We did move to pass the legislation yesterday. If, for some reason, somebody decided, let's back away from this, we would have to amend that, is that correct? Wasn't it in there, the discussion with the master development agreement? Or?
So I believe you would need to ultimately amend at least some of the exhibits, and there are 2 terms of the development, I'm going completely off memory, there are 2 terms of the development agreement I also believe that you'd need to amend. I think certainly the board would be agreeable to that if it's not a community priority, of course, but yes, there's compelling language within the development agreement that requires the developer to do certain things that require city participation and support, and so you would need to amend it, yes.
Thank you, I just wanted to make that clear that we approved it yesterday and would have to.
That's a really good question.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, a couple things. One, we could authorize a bond for $3 million now, and it doesn't look like we're going to be expending any money out of that $3 million for quite some time.
Correct.
So again, when we're talking about the $30 million a year for 5 years, we need to be clear that the $30 million falls within the area where we're paying debt service. So I wouldn't count the 2, even if we approve the bond, I wouldn't count the $3 million towards the $30 million for FY '25. Because we're not going to be spending a dime in FY '25. The other thing is, if we authorize the $3 million and things fall apart and there's no more bridge, we just don't sell the bond. That's how you back out of it. You don't need to, you won't spend it unless you have to.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. Now I'm going to probably be more confused. Per what Alderman Dowd said, we're not going to be selling this, but if the moment that the developer starts developing this and building this and doing all the permitting and so on, we're kind of on the hook for paying for that. Is that not going to happen right when because it says it has to be completed before they get any certificate of occupancy by 12/31/2029. I'm trying to remember what date he said that he felt that the first phase would be, the first apartments would be completed.
We are talking about years here.
Okay.
We are, the remediation will take, and frankly, a short amount of time, but it
Right.
will take a year. Construction will take a year, if not more.
Okay.
And so this could be as early as calendar year 2026,
Okay.
theoretically, but it could be as late as 2029.
Okay.
It's difficult to say, and so to Alderman Dowd's point, I think the point of others, we certainly wouldn't want to reflect this as a 2025 or 2026 debt service hit, if you will, but authorization needs to happen early. Debt service can be worked into subsequent years of the 5-year capital plan, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Director Cummings.
Yeah, plus, I want to just kind of note, we are locked in at 3 million. And so I would like to get that authorized at 3 million because costs will continue to go up. And I would hate for that developer to come to us and say, well, now the bridge is 4 million.
Yeah.
So if we can say in good faith, we've done what we've needed to do.
And he's not listening.
He's a pretty smart man, so I think he knows.
He's upstairs at planning
Yeah,
board
and
right now, actually, so
and
he's not
And
listening.
he's very tired of dealing with me because of these very nuances that I was pretty tough about. So I think that's also, again, it positions the city in a better light.
Alderman Clee.
Okay, so now having said that, if we authorize the $3 million and by the time he goes to do this in 2026 or 2027 and the cost goes up, are we on the hook for we're just on the hook for the $3 million?
The obligation is his and he has to do it.
Okay.
One of the
And we
ways,
just
that
have
was
to
one of the
hand it-
reasons why I wanted it structured this way.
And we just have to hand over $3 million to him, no matter
Correct.
what it costs him.
And he understands that.
Good deal.
Okay, home stretch, 2 related projects. Appreciate everyone's time tonight. These are fun. The next project Director Ham alluded to earlier, this is actually going back to an old plan. This goes back to the 2019-2020 Riverfront Development Plan, much of which is going to be under construction over the coming year. I think construction's begun, which is exciting. But we're actually looking at a different section of the riverfront, and this is quadrant 1, as it was referred to in this plan, and it's called in the plan the Mill Yard area. As folks are aware here, whether it be the NIMCO site or the properties that BIDA has recently been given some authorization to proceed with, there's activity happening in this area. And so it started staff to think about opportunities to enhance the public spaces that exist here. And it's drawn us back to that 2019 Quadrant 1 plan. Now things have changed. And so we're currently in the process of beginning an update to this concept that was here. If you could see this in greater detail, you'd see that some of the different notes here are no longer relevant as to proposed improvements and other enhancements that were to be made. And so again, we're updating this concept right now. We're going to be going to different aldermanic committees, the Board of Public Works and others to get their feedback on what they'd like to see in this area. But assuming that this is a strategic direction in which the city would like to move, and potentially even that maybe a TIF expansion is considered, and that's for a conversation for another time, we would like to advance some of the design in this area so that we have an understanding of a possible future improvement to the riverfront, much like what's being done in the core area of the riverfront today. I want to be really clear that this does not in any way mean that Quadrant 1 improvements will be done before the east side of the riverfront. That's a conversation for another time, frankly. But what we'd like to do is begin the conversation about what the improvements and what the vision might look like for this area as these private sites and properties within this Mill Yard area are redeveloped. We'd like to be able to provide them with direction as to some of the enhancements that they'd like to see developed. And that may be, again, Riverwalk improvements, public space enhancements, possibly the creation of a dog park, which I'll get to in just a second here, and additional pedestrian connections. I think we're also definitely really excited about the opportunity to interface with Mine Falls Park, while again respecting the existing character of that area. That's all anticipated to be a part of this. So what we've requested is $250,000. This might be one of those projects that may not be a bonded project. It might be done another way. It could be, I'll use the E word, it could be escrow, it could be something else. But we certainly have more momentum to build before getting to that point, but wanted to be clear that we're looking at this area in light of all the redevelopment interest that's happening here and the other enhancements that have taken place. And so I'm actually going to jump right into the next one. And Alderwoman Klee is really not a fan of this project, not a dog fan generally, and so I'm not sure I can get her support. But in all seriousness, the city put in some substantial effort back in 2020 and 2021 through public input sessions to identify a location within the mill yard for a dog park. And as part of that, the dog park feasibility study was developed. That included sorry for the jokes, everyone. That included identification of a site and some level of design. It also, and I may be wrong on this detail, so please correct me, it also really catalyzed the creation of the Animal and Dog Park Committee. I don't know if that was a result of that plan, but certainly they're taking this effort and moving forward with it. But it's no secret to anyone that a $1.5 million dog park, or really between 1 and 1.5, this is an amenity. It's an amenity I think many folks would enjoy, particularly new residents that might be living in recently redeveloped properties in the mill yard. But it is an amenity nonetheless. And so to that end, while we're deeply committed to pursuing this project, and it is in the CIP document, we recognize that there's going to be some level of various funding sources needed to move it forward. That might include grant funds. It might be that one of the private redevelopments in the area is a part of a partnership to actually develop this for their own residents. It might even be that as part of the prior effort that I mentioned, that possibly in some future there is a TIF district that this might be a project as part of. There are a variety of different options that we might move forward with, but what we do know is that there are opportunities to create some green space that might be actively used in this area that needs to be, of course, resilient to floodplain and other issues that we also know could have an impact. And so we're trying to move this forward and keep this sort of relevant. And we think that there might be an opportunity to do this in the coming years as those redevelopments happen, so wanted to include it here at $1.5 million. And so with that, Madam President, that's all I have for this evening. I appreciate your time.
That's what you think.
Committee.
Alderman Klee.
Thank you. I'm going to be very honest with you. You're right. I love dogs. I have been vehemently in favor of this dog park, but I will be truthful in the fact that when the city is looking at, trying to pull in its belt, so to speak, and watch our funding, this is an amenity that I'm not sure that we could necessarily, and I am on the ADPAC, the Animal Dog Park Committee. They are also working towards a 501c3, looking for members and so on. So if that could get off the ground and we could move towards that and grants and so on, I would be very much in favor of it. But I'm not sure that I can, truthfully, when we're looking at things like the Keefe, we look at schools, we look at the parking garage, we look at DPW needs and so on, I'm not sure that I can necessarily get on board with something like this. And I have a lot of wants from Mount Pleasant to Keefe to everything, but I also am realistic in knowing that we have to look at things in a reasonable manner. And this may be one of those things that has to, unless we can find alternate sources, such as some of the things that you mentioned, I'm not sure that I would be on board for just constructing a dog park. And I want to put that out on the table. Even though I am part of the ADPAC, they'll probably lock the door when I come in next time. But I think it's something we have to look at. So.
Madam President, if I just may quickly respond, I appreciate that, and I don't want to in any way advocate against this project because I have a lot of folks out there that would be angry at me for doing that. But what I will say is, in the event that we're able to assemble multiple funding sources for this, I do want to be transparent that it's possible there may be a gap. that's left to fill by the municipality. And, you know, we could be back before you asking for some sum of money, but ideally not the full $1.5 million. We'll be working hard to identify other sources.
Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I will just say that not everything that the city does is going to be for the benefit of all of its citizens. So I'm a cat owner. I would never own a dog because I'm allergic to dogs. So
I love cats.
I couldn't have. I'm not allergic to cats. I'm one of those weird people. I'm not allergic to cats, but I am allergic to dogs. But that being said, you know, I would love to find a way to do this project because I think it would be good for the area. I think it would be good for the city. I think it would attract people who would want to live in our city. While I wouldn't advocate for spending $1.5 million on it, I do think that it has merit, and I do think that you know, it's going to be something that essentially will bring economic vitality to the city because people love dogs, and people want to move to a city that values those values. We are a city that loves animals, and we want to promote that. So I am with Director Sullivan. I think if we find a way that we can, you know, do a lot of fundraising for this, get grant money, I think putting it into a TIF in that area, if we needed to do half of the cost, $750,000, something like that, but it was paid for by the improvements in the district, I would have no problem with something along those lines, because I think, again, this is something that is going to make Nashua a place that people want to move and want to be.
Director Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Just a quick question. Would that 1.5 bring about, or is there any thought process of trying to celebrate the trailhead into Mine Falls?
Director Sullivan.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And the answer is yes. I certainly think both as part of this and as part of the concept planning, I think there is a contemplation of some trailhead enhancements. But what I want to be sensitive to is that we haven't yet had a full discussion with the Board of Public Works about that idea, and so I don't want to represent that's something we definitely can do, but I will tell you that there's some misuse of this area in the area to the south of the red parcel there that I think we'd want to work really hard to correct. I think that there are some folks that may not always feel comfortable entering Mine Falls right there, and so I think there are some improvements that could be done. So I'll tell you my 2 cents is that we would do some gateway improvements, but that would obviously be subject to further conversation with the Board of Public Works. If we could find a way to fund that'd be great. But yes, I think we should be thinking about that.
Thank you.
Alderman Cleek.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, I would love to see a dog park there. I would love to see it in a TIF. I'd love to see alternate funding, and if the city had to do a gap, if we did add to this trailhead and so on, the city, while it's not free, the city does have a dog park. It's not right here in Mine Falls. It's in the southwest quadrant, I
Yes.
believe, yeah. I once belonged to it with when I first got our Greyhound. It's beautiful. I think it's like 3-point-something acres. Half of it's wooded, and it is a beautiful area. So it's not like the city doesn't have any kind of a dog park. This would become a free dog park, but also part of this, which is why we're working towards getting a nonprofit status and so on, is there's maintenance and liability. Not too much liability. We have learned that there's not as much liability as one would think. But all of those things are costs that come into it, and I don't want to ignore those future costs. So I am all for the dog park. We all know that. I worked very hard with many of the other members to it, but I would want to see that we have some funding sources as well as sources that are going to look towards maintenance and so on. It's not just something that Public Works would go in and mow. It's a continual type things because there's picking up poop. And people don't like to do that, even if it's their own dog. So, yeah, I think it's a long conversation we have to have, and I don't think it should be necessarily approved. But I love the idea of it being in a TIF and maybe some private development funding.
I couldn't agree with Alderman Clemmons more. I mean, I think people downtown, people that are moving into these apartments all around there, people in Clock Tower, a lot of people have dogs. I mean, I became a dog person, let's see, next month will be 3 years. I've become a dog person. She's at my house right now waiting for me to come home. And I'm so excited, but yes, we do need a dog park there. And I think it would be a great spot for it. And I think people downtown would appreciate it. I mean, you have all these new apartments and not a lot of green space downtown, especially if you have a dog, so.
If you want to authorize this tonight, I mean, that's fine.
No.
Nice try.
Thank you very much for your time, though. I appreciate it.
So with that being said, Madam President, that kind of concludes the presentations and information that we wanted to provide you all this evening. We will be regrouping again on May 7th, where we anticipate hearing the priorities from schools, public health, and library. And then in the meantime, I'll be working on putting some more dates together. As you all know, it's a busy time of year with budget. So I will be back to you with some additional dates and some more presentations lined up. Again, all with the goal of trying to wrap this exercise up by the end of May.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alderman. Thank you, all of you. Thank you all for being here. Alderman Clay, do we have a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion for adjournment.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 7:48 PM. Thanks again, everyone.